Nice. Yeah, I'm looking up Tolkien Gateway, and it says here that Pelargir was built in the Second Age, 2350, as a haven of the faithful. The King's Men established havens farther south. It had, in its early days, been a city only a few miles away from the coasts, but after the downfall of Numenor, the coasts along the Bay of Belfalas had retreated a great distance, and the city was left far inland. That's actually quite different than Venice. It became an even greater haven in the days of the Ship Kings. Taranin Falastur built a great house there with its roots in the water, which he so dearly loved. His wife Beruthiel did not, however, and preferred to live in Osgiliath with her cats. Taranin's nephew Eärnil I, who succeeded him, rebuilt Pelargir and built a great navy to conquer Umbar. So it's probably the connection is the navy, and then the having some houses in the water, kind of on, like Venice. So interesting. I suppose, too, there's another reason, because you'd see, perhaps when you look at Europe, you'd say, well, really, if there's any comparison at all, you look at how the older civilizations would be, in the Mediterranean, right, as opposed to Northern Europe, which would be a lot more like the Northern Kingdom of Arnor, which is maybe less organized and not as powerful because of the Roman Empire. But that's just my speculation. Anything else from this letter you want to comment on before we move on? Okay. Richard, would you like to see if I can...
give me half a sec.
Okay.
Time's up.
That's Richard's line to do that. Okay, I'm going to try to send this to you.
Okay.
I'm going to send... Here's the next letter.
Sweet.
Maybe.
I got it. It's a shorter wall of text.
Oh, actually, you know what this is? This is interesting. Okay, well, do you want to read this one? I'm looking for my charge cord.
169, a letter from High Brogren.
Yeah,
11th of September.
Hugh Brogan, yeah, that one.
1955. Did you accidentally skip one?
Did I? No, I thought we read 168.
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. Hugh Brogan, 11 September 55, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Your discovery of Numenor in C.S. Lewis, that hideous strength, is discovery of plagiarism. Well,
serious form of flattery.
Well, not that, since he used the word taken from my legend. Hold on, I gotta make this window bigger so I can see things. Getting older in age.
Need a stronger prescription, Sonny?
What? I can't see your words. My eye teeth are in the way. Let's see. Well, not that, since he used the word taken from my legends of the First and Second Ages in the belief that they would soon appear. They have not, but I suppose now they may. The spelling Numenor is due to his hearing it and not seeing it. Numenor, or Nudumor, means in High Elven simply Westland. Sorry?
Sorry, I was trying to... Oh, Numenor, yeah.
Yeah, Numenor means Westland. As for the shape of the world of the Third Age, I am afraid that was derived dramatically rather than geographically, or paleontology. Paleontologic, ugh. I do not hear that word combined that way sometimes. I do sometimes wish that I had made some sort of agreement between the imaginations or theories of the geologists and my map a little more possible, but that would only have made more trouble with human history. What he's saying there is that he determined the shape of the land not because of the geology of the area he was looking at, but because of the dramatic needs of the story.
Oh, I see. Huh.
So the shape of the world was plot driven. That's what he's saying here.
And not a reflection of Old English and the sinking of Ireland and as
What,
Atlantis.
Ireland has sunk?
Yeah. Or as we like to say, the state of New California sinking into the sea.
What? There's a New California?
Or there's a Hotel California, anyway. Yeah, I don't really have a lot on this letter, just that this goes into one of the small sore points between Lewis and Tolkien. I know that we've mentioned once before that without meaning to be, without trying to steal his ideas, they shared so many, stories and everything that when you're kind of having this almost common mythology, or it's like you're kind of saying what if, and so some of that I feel like would be kind of inevitable, except that you don't see Tolkien borrowing from Lewis at all. But Lewis, of course, was a huge inspiration to Tolkien to keep writing. And it just reminds us of how a lot of the content was something that they had kind of gone back and forth on long before the Lord of the Rings was published.
You have to admit that Tolkien had a lot more to steal than C.S. Lewis did.
Well, that's true.
I'm sorry, borrow without intent to return.
I think it's interesting, too, that Tolkien's like, look, it's okay that he borrowed it, but he could have at least spelled it right, because if you break down the meaning, the word, it has to be spelled this way because it means west land, and obviously if it's spelled with an I, not an E, it doesn't mean that,
But he does preface that with, to be fair, he only heard it spoken, he never saw it spelled.
Right.
Yes, dwarves and dwarfs and so on.
So he borrowed Numenor. It's referred in that hideous strength. I'm actually going to try to find the quote for that.
Yeah.
Hold on a minute.
Now I get to go plug in. Hang on.
Everybody's running out of power.
Let's see here.
Is that your floor? Yeah, that has to be your floor, Brian.
Okay, yeah, hold on a second.
Or is that the roof? That was the roof. Why do you have floor tiles on your ceiling? It's not kosher, man.
Okay, I found it. So this is in the preface to The Hideous Strength. My copy is like from the 60s and it's falling apart. Okay, I'm going to read this, guys. This is the preface of That Hideous Strength, and it's apparently where Lewis makes the reference to Numenor. This is in C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength, preface. I have called this a fairy tale in the hope that no one who dislikes fantasy may be misled by the first 2 chapters into reading further, and then complain of his disappointment. If you ask why, intending to write about magicians, devils, pantomime animals, and planetary angels, I nevertheless begin with such humdrum scenes and persons, I reply that I am following the traditional fairy tale. We do not always notice its method, because the cottages, castles, woodcutters, and petty kings with which a fairy tale opens have become for us as remote as the witches and ogres to which it proceeds. But they were not remote at all to the men who made and first enjoyed the stories. They were indeed more realistic and commonplace than Bracton College is to me. For many German peasants had actually met cruel stepmothers, whereas I have never in any university come across a college like Bracton. This is a tall tale, or tall story about devilry, though it has behind it a serious point, which I have tried to make in my Abolition of Man. In this story, the outer rim of that devilry had to be shown touching the life of some ordinary and respectable profession. I selected my own profession, not, of course, because I think fellows of college is more likely to be thus corrupted than anyone else, but because my own is the only profession I know well enough to write about. A very small university is imagined because that has certain conveniences for fiction. Edgestowe has no resemblance, save for its smallness, to Durham, a university with which the only connection I have had was entirely pleasant. I believe that one of the central ideas of this tale came into my head from conversations I had with a scientific colleague some time before I met a rather similar suggestion in the works of Mr. Olaf Stapledon. If I am mistaken in this, Mr. Stapledon is so rich in invention that he can well afford to lend, and I admire his invention, though not his philosophy so much that I should feel no shame to borrow. Those who would like to learn further about Numenor and the true West must, alas, await the publication of much that still exists only in the manuscripts of my friend, Professor J.R.R. Tolkien. The period of this story is vaguely after the war. It concludes the trilogy out of which Out of the Silent Planet was the first part and Perelandra the second, but can be read on its own. C.S. Lewis, Magdalen College, Oxford, Christmas Eve, 1943. Okay, so there's the reference to Numenor. I don't feel like that was really much of it's not really much of a plagiarism because he's just referring to something that Tolkien has written about, and I think there's one other spot where it shows up, maybe where it's just kind of hinting at some sunken land that some place that that had gone under the sea at one point. So I think there's one other reference somewhere in it. So anyway, but I mean, Tolkien himself borrowed the idea of Numenor to some extent from Atlantis, didn't he?
Yes. Yes, and that is definitely a multi-culture lore there. That it's in the Irish and the Icelandic and other places. So
yes, what? Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. Thank you.
Our reference of it is from the Greek history.
Right, that's right. Yeah, good point, Richard. Yeah, so he's kind of reimagining it in a a fantastical Northern European version. So, okay. And then, of course, the whole thing about geologists and maps. I've actually read an article how Tolkien's map of Middle Earth is all wrong because mountains wouldn't go that way and rivers wouldn't go that way. And
yeah. And my grandfather was a geologist, and he always liked to say stuff like that, and and then he was boggled by stuff like Crater Lake. Crater Lake, you would think that the water egress from there goes through Klamath Falls and out that way, but it doesn't. It comes north through through Bend, through the Deschutes River, all the way out to the Columbia. So it's geology is just bizarre. And
not many rivers actually do that. I think Nile is noteworthy for being one of the few that do.
Yeah.
I just have to ask, do you guys remember the Eä Sahara? It's been put forth as a candidate for the site of Atlantis.
Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah. Well, the theory is that that part of Africa has been uplifting, so that's why it's in the middle of a desert.
Yeah.
Instead of being underwater.
There's actually a little hint, a reference to that in Aquaman, the movie. So, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and move us on. So, letter 170 is short.
That is very short.
Chris, you want to read that?
170 from a letter to Ellen and Unwin, 30 September 1955. So think of the timing of this. This is Allen and Unwin might be okay. I'll just read it and then comment later. When is Volume 3 likely now to appear? I shall be murdered if something does not happen soon. So I've got two thoughts on this. Thought number one is your very typical Christmas sales timing, and then thought number two is maybe there's some additional back and forth going on how to deal with the appendices.
Yeah.
Which is probably more the case than my former observation.
Right. Oh my goodness. I don't know. It's publishing. That's Richard. Your experience was a lot.
But what do you think? What do you think his motive is?
I think he's getting letters because, I mean, the books were published one at a time, right?
Correct.
So the first two books are out. Remember where the Two Towers leaves things. Frodo was alive but taken by the enemy. It is the worst cliffhanger ever. Yeah. Because Samwise had just figured out that Frodo had not actually been killed by Sheila. And so you're left in a horrible lurch. There's so many loose ends that are not tied up. And then it's been a full year or more since the Towers was published. And so he's thinking, I'm getting so many letters saying, when is the next book coming out? When is the next book coming out? So I think that's what he's thinking about. The fans with pitchforks or something. I don't know.
Oh. You're saying that fan mail is not always positive.
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
I'm your biggest fan.
Yeah, I think if you're referring to Stephen King's Misery, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not like that, but yeah, I think he was feeling something, some pressure. Also, 30th of September. I mean, school, right? Oxford, you're back in full swing.
Yes.
Point. So he's like, I really probably could use the money right now too from the proceeds.
Yeah, I'm trying to weigh whether this is a monetary issue or whether this is a I'm getting killed with fan mail issue or both.
Well, let's maybe read one more letter to see if we can find out anything more from his context. How about that?
The next letter is another short note.
Okay, letter 171 to Hugh Brogan. In December 9th. Oh, you want me to send that to you, Richard?
Yeah, it's not quite as short.
Hold on a minute. I'm working on it.
Processing.
This is quite long. I guess I could still put it in the chat. That's not all of it either. Hold on a minute. Oh, that's almost all of it. Okay, hold on. Okay, just a tiny bit more. Oh, good grief. Okay, I'll read some. Letter 171 to Hugh Brogan. In December 1954, Brogan wrote to Tolkien criticizing the archaic narrative style of parts of The Two Towers, especially the chapter The King of the Golden Hall. He called this style Ossianic and said he agreed with the critic's description of it as tushery. At the time, Tolkien made no reply to this, but when on 18th of September 1955, Brogan wrote again, apologizing for being impertinent, stupid, or sycophantic, Tolkien began to draft what follows. In the event, he did not send it, but instead wrote a brief note saying that the matter of archaism would take too long to debate in a letter and must wait until their next meeting. September 1955. Dear Hugh, don't be disturbed. I have not noticed any impertinence or sycophancy in your letters, and anyone so appreciative and so perceptive is entitled to criticism. Anyway, I do not naturally breathe an air of undiluted incense. It was not what you said last letter, one that I answered, or you're right to say it, that might have called for a reply if I had time for it, but the pain that I always feel when anyone, in an age when almost all auctorial manhandling of English is permitted, especially if disrupted, in the name of art or personal expression, immediately dismisses out of court deliberate, quote, archaism, end quote. The proper use of tushery is to apply it to the kind of bogus medieval stuff which attempts without knowledge to give a supposed temporal color with expletives such as tush, pish, zounds, merry, and the like. But a real archaic English is far more terse than modern. Also, many of things said could not be said in our slack and often frivolous idiom. Of course, not being especially well read in modern English, and far more familiar with works in the ancient and middle idioms, my own ear is to some extent affected. So that though I could easily recollect how a modern would put this or that, what comes easiest to mind or pen is not quite that. But take an example from the chapter that you especially singled out, and called terrible. Book 3, The King of the Golden Hall. Quote, Nay, Gandalf, said the king, you do not know your own skill in healing. It shall not be so. I myself will go to war, to fall in the front of the battle, if it must be. Thus shall I sleep better. This is a fair sample, moderated or watered archaism. Using only words that still are used or known to the educated, the king would really have said, Nay, thou wast not thine own skill in healing, it shall not be so. I myself will go to war, to fall, etc. I know well enough what a modern would say. Not at all, my dear G. You don't know your own skill as a doctor. Things aren't going to be like that. I shall go to the war in person, if I have to be one of the first casualties. And then what? Theoden would certainly think and probably say, thus shall I sleep better. But people who think like that just do not talk a modern idiom. You can have, I shall lie easier in my grave, or I should sleep sounder in my grave like that rather than if I stayed at home, if you like. But there would be an insincerity of thought, a disunion of word and meaning. For a king who spoke in a modern style would not really think in such terms at all. And any reference to sleeping quietly in the grave would be a deliberate archaism of expression on his part, however worded, far more bogus than the actual archaic English that I've used, like some non-Christian making reference to some Christian belief which did not in fact move him at all. Or page 107. As an example of archaism that cannot be defended as dramatic, since it is not in dialogue, but the author's description of the arming of the guests, which seemed specially to upset you. But such heroic scenes do not occur in a modern setting to which a modern idiom belongs. Why deliberately ignore, refuse to use the wealth of English, which leaves us a choice of styles, without any possibility of unintelligibility? I can see no more reason for not using the much terser and more vivid ancient style than for changing the obsolete weapons, helms, shields, hauberks into modern uniforms. Helms, too, they chose, is archaic. Some wrongly class it as an inversion, since normal order is, they also chose helmets, or they chose helmets too. Real modern English, they also picked out some helmets around shields. But this is not normal order. And if modern English has lost the trick of putting a word desired to emphasize, for pictorial, emotional, or logical reasons, into prominent first place, without addition of a lot of little empty words, as the Chinese say, so much the worse for it. And so much the better for it, the sooner it learns the trick again. And someone must begin the teaching by example. I am sorry to find you affected by the extraordinary 20th century delusion that its usages per se and simply as contemporary, irrespective of whether they are terser, more vivid, or even nobler, have some peculiar validity above those of all other times, so as not to use them, even when quite unsuitable in tone, is a solecism, a gaffe, a thing at which one's friends shudder or feel hot in the collar. Shake yourself out of this parochialism of time. Also, not to be too donnish, learn to discriminate between the bogus and the genuine antique, as you would if you hoped not to be cheated by a dealer.
Fake news.
Actually, I was thinking that was a grammar Nazi.
Yeah. So he's trying to make the point that things that we would say, well, that's archaic to speak like that. It seems not so genuine. That there's times when, even in a fantasy novel, there might be people might speak differently for a good reason rather than trying to just sound artificially archaic. What do you think?
Yes.
Does he prove his point or not?
Well, the Queen does. The royal we are not amused.
Do you say that to your children a lot, Chris?
No, but I thought that the Queen's speech. I'm gonna hold out the Queen's speech as a bright and shining light of what us postmoderns would consider archaic, being spoken by a modern, trying to comfort her people and to help them carry on in this time of not so good things going on, and compare her to our current president. And that's kind of, I think, what Tolkien would be thinking about. There is an intentional way of speaking in Middle English that gives an environment, an air to the tone of the language, which allows and evokes a feeling that is different than what modern speech would have.
Well, yeah, if someone were to use "we are not amused" on me, I would color them as opinionated and obnoxious.
Go ahead.
My mom was making the observation when she came and visited our church that she is having a hard time with people dressing up and wearing ties and suits because she equated that to something in her past of being insincere. And then she got to know some of these folks later when we had adoption, and it was the same thing. It's an older style, and here she is living out in Prineville, Oregon, where you only wear a suit at a wedding and a funeral.
Right. Yeah, it's the context you come from and how you perceive things. That's true. I do want to make a point, though, Chris, not to disagree with you necessarily, but just to clarify. So it's really interesting how the Queen uses that. So there's, if you go to royal.uk, that's the royal family's website. It has all the transcripts of the speeches, and so I think you're referring to her Easter message, in which she said, "This year Easter will be different for many of us, but by keeping apart we keep others safe. But Easter isn't canceled. Indeed, we need Easter as much as ever. The discovery of the risen Christ on the first Easter day gave his followers new hope and fresh purpose, and we can all take heart from this. We know that coronavirus will not overcome us. As dark as death can be, particularly for those suffering with grief, light and life are greater. May the living flame of the Easter hope be a steady guide as we face the future." But she concludes by saying, "I wish everyone of all faiths and denominations a blessed Easter." And in her message before that, which was before Easter, called the Queen's Broadcast to the UK and Commonwealth, she actually uses almost completely the first person pronoun, but then she switches to "we" at the end while she's talking about, while we have faced challenges before, this one is different. And so she kind of speaks she uses "we," interestingly, in different ways. Historically, you're absolutely right that the very proper way of using "we" and you can see this, for example, I suppose on The Crown or other shows, right? It's this, or even old footage of her addresses, and so when she's saying "we" and she's meaning herself only, right? The royal we, which is quite old. That's a very old particular custom, but she also seems to use "we" nowadays more often than not, representing, like, she's one of the few people who for British people, she can kind of speak for all of them.
Yes.
I mean, we can do that too. We can speak for all Americans in a sense. We can say, we are going through this or that right now, and this is how it is affecting us as a group. But obviously, we have less street cred or whatever because we haven't lived through, a world war and, not decades.
Precisely.
So anyway, but your point is still well taken. You're saying it could sound like an archaism, but it's actually appropriate for her, is what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yes.
But if you or I or Richard were to do it, that would probably not seem very natural.
Right. Yep.
We are not in the habit of using "we."
We are not amused.
Oh, good stuff. Okay, that I hadn't thought about that. We pronoun. Are there other archaisms that you think still are appropriate, or that are sometimes used in a very artificial way? I mean, is this relevant to now, or is this only something that was a deal for Tolkien and his critics?
Well, he mentions that his ear and his pen are trained in Middle English, and that affects his writing. It probably affects how he speaks in his classes when he's teaching his students, and that always creates a strain on his students and perhaps those he is pen pal with. But when he's in his meeting at the Eagle and Child, he is among friends who have most of them have been trained that way naturally, and so they're in a sense they can let down their guard and speak freely of Middle English terms.
Yeah. I mean, having lived. Okay, go ahead, Richard.
The example he was giving was talking about them grabbing helms and shields, and he was saying there's not really a case in modern English where you talk about grabbing your helmet and shield.
Yeah.
Because that's not the accoutrement of equipment that we use anymore.
Johnny, get my gun.
So
why don't you get your own gun instead of having Johnny do it?
There's a lot of sense that he's saying, look, why would you say that these words are archaic in the way that I use them, when that's like saying, yeah, well, why not then say that the weapons that they're using are also archaic? So he's got a good persuasive point there. Yeah, I think there's just certain times when it seems to be more appropriate, where we would feel like using an older sounding English fits better.
And I think he did very masterfully upon initial read of Beowulf. His tone of Beowulf is far more appropriately Middle English than other translations.
Right. I just read this last week of Terry Jones, of Monty Python fame, who passed away in January. And Terry Jones had said that one time he was coming into a lecture that Tolkien was giving. He was reading from Beowulf, And then partway through, he stopped, and with the handkerchief, he put in his false teeth, and everybody was laughing. But I guess Terry Jones was one of his students at one time. But yeah, I think he would have been very aware of that, and would have, of course, read it in the original Old English. But then, if in terms of translation, he'd be thinking about that too, about what words do you choose, and even when you translate. I mean, I know Bible translators deal with this too. Do
Yes.
do you translate it just into the literal, the most accessible meaning? Well, there's an argument for that. Like you might have perhaps like the Message or something like that. The problem with the more you make something that's older, text to it, and the more you try to make that update, if you make it super updated sounding, it actually
Right.
becomes dated more quickly, because
Correct.
if you use like colloquialisms, or like, just, you know what I'm talking, like slang, the slang of the 1970s is no longer always going to be the slang of now, or
Yes.
especially in years. So that is a struggle. What kind of English do you use?
Well,
Well,
the movie Airplane had a little segment where they had two African American guys talking to each other in what they were calling Black English, and they put subtitles down. I thought it was amusing because I was understanding both sides. I was understanding the subtitles, and I was understanding what they were saying. It was kind of a weird non sequitur, because most of the time when I'm reading subtitles, it's in a language I don't know.
yes. I have I have taken a liking to the RSV for this particular reason, because the RSV, when God is speaking, it is a thee and thou, and a different style of English to set his speech apart from common man. And then when common man is referred to or spoken of, it uses a bit more modern English. It's a very interesting translation from that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, so that's it, and again, what we're recognizing is why. What's the motivation there? Even if we wouldn't necessarily do it ourselves, I can see why. Even for some people, and I mean, I didn't grow up in any kind of religious home at all, but growing to understand the Christian faith as a young man, this was all new to me, right? But like recognizing that, you know, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, or our Father who art in heaven. There's traditional patterns that certain things get passed down in English language, and even though they quote outlive their usefulness, right? They have a certain cadence and rhythm and familiarity. Yep. I mean, Shakespeare would be another great example, actually, because because that's the same time period as, say, the King James Bible. So you have essentially these forms where originally, as I understand it, you was meant as only a plural, what we now would call, in the South, they'd say y'all. That you was used only for plural group, and thee was singular. And or they'd be singular at the end of a sentence, like I call to thee. Thou would be again first person in the subject line, in the beginning of the sentence. So, but those have both been replaced by the word you, which originally meant plural only. So English continues to change, and maybe we hold on to some archaisms because there is a comfort in certain patterns.
Yes.
Be able to say we want to kind of maybe put the brakes on a little bit. I don't know.
And then there are revisions or revisionist modern English where people in the South break out you and form a separate word for the plural of you, and then that has spread across the country, where y'all and all y'all, and those types of things are used as a correction to some deficiencies we have in English.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine Shakespeare? You know, you think about, what would be,
Every time you say Shakespeare, I remember that line from the Star Trek movie.
right? Which is what?
Oh, you have not experienced Hamlet unless you've heard it in the original Klingon.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm looking at Hamlet in modern English as opposed to Hamlet in the original text. So you go like, you know, here's Shakespeare. You know, you look at Shakespeare, Hamlet, the original text, Act 1, Scene 1, and the beginning, it's Bernardo, who's there? Francisco, nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Bernardo, long live the king, right? Or like he says, 'tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco. But the modern English, if you were to say this in Hamlet, it is, who's there? No, you answer me. It was Francisco's voice. Stop and identify yourself. Bernardo stopped. Long live the king. Bernardo? Yes, it's me. Francisco relaxed. You're right on time. It's just gone midnight, said Bernardo. Get off the bed, Francisco. It just doesn't sound the same, right?
I don't think Shakespeare's in Old English. Old English is closer to German.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
And Middle English is mostly unintelligible to us as well.
Okay, but what we're talking about is not necessarily one particular phase of English, as in Old English or Middle English. We're talking about archaisms. And
Right.
so what he's referring to in his wording of Theoden's speech is neither Middle English nor Old English, but it is old-sounding English.
Well, the phrase to be or not to be, I could never figure out what the heck he was talking about until I realized he was talking about, should I kill myself or not?
Right. Right.
But, you know, okay, so, you know, and my original thought process was, okay, so he either wants to be over here or he wants to be over there. I don't see the problem depending on the time of day and the weather. You know, it was like just nonsensical.
Okay, well, on the
I've lost you.
on the website of No Sweat Shakespeare, I am reading from the modern version, and this is supposed to be where his here it is. Hamlet came into the hall. He was walking slowly. He didn't see Ophelia. He was thinking. He paused and stood still. The question for him was whether to continue to exist or not. Whether it was more noble to suffer the slings and arrows of an unbearable situation, or to declare war on the sea of troubles that afflict one, and by opposing them to end them. To die, he pondered the prospect. To sleep, as simple as that. And with that sleep, we end the heartaches and the thousand natural miseries that human beings have to endure. It's an end that we would all ardently hope for. To die, to sleep, perhaps to dream. Yes, that was the problem, because in that sleep of death, the dreams we might have when we have shed this mortal body must make us pause. I think part of it to me is, and this is probably why he put this into Theoden's words. If you want to make things super understandable, you're going to make it sound like the English of the street. But if you want to lend a sense of majesty to someone, to a character, one of the easiest ways to do that would be to make it sound like they're using English from an older time. That's what I think it's about. And therefore, it feels... And of course, the funny thing is, would Shakespeare himself feel that? Because back then, this was just the way, to be or not to be. You know, yes, it's dramatic language, but yeah, it's pretty much the thee and the thy is all the way they were talking normally, right? So are we hearing more archaism in Shakespeare than Shakespeare himself would have felt? Probably.
As I understood it, the revolution of Shakespeare's work was he was translating it into the street lingo.
Interesting.
He was. The language he used at the time was very modern in comparison to the way it was used in other contexts. And the other piece of it was that this was the period of time where King Jimmy was trying to get all the various different languages to be unified throughout the kingdom, rather, and kill off Welsh and Irish and such.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think this is a good spot to start with the letters. That was a really great discussion, guys. Thank you. I wanted to just give an update on the Lord of adaptation, or I should say, not the Lord of the Rings, but their second age of Middle Earth. And of course, right now, as you would imagine, production is kind of on hold, as that's not able to kind of go forward right now with the sheltering in place and various restrictions around the world. But there is an update as of March 17th. So this is a little bit old, but we didn't meet last month, so And it just says Amazon has kept news of Lord of the Rings as quiet as it possibly can, but IndieWire has compiled a list of the 9 must-know details about the upcoming series. One key update: on March 17, Amazon Prime Video announced that it was closing production on the series in New Zealand in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The closure comes 1 month after the series started filming and after New Zealand instituted protective immigration measures to protect the country from the coronavirus, including 14 days of compulsory self-isolation for citizens and visitors entering the country. That being said, a closure of production is not a cancellation of the show, and with a very broad and anticipated 2021 air date, there's no reason at this point to believe that the project's release will be delayed. So from its big shoes to fill as another Tolkien adaptation to its hush-hush casting, below is everything you need to know about Amazon's The Lord of the Rings. And then basically it's the rest of it is all what we already knew about it.
Nothing to report.
Yeah. I mean, it does give a little bit of clarifications where it talks about Tom Shippey. This is one of the reasons why I'm actually hopeful about this, because Tom Shippey, as you may know, is a really respected Tolkien scholar, and he's their consultant. And it says here that the estate of J.R.R. Tolkien has refused to grant Amazon permission to film anything other than the Second Age, as to not alter the history of the more fleshed out Third Age. But you can add new characters, Shippey said, and ask a lot of questions, like, what has Sauron done in the meantime? Where was he after Morgoth was defeated? Theoretically, Amazon can answer these questions by inventing the answers, since Tolkien did not describe it, Shippey explained. But it must not contradict anything which Tolkien did say. That's what Amazon has to watch out for. It must be canonical. It is impossible to change the boundaries which Tolkien has created. It is necessary to remain Tolkienian. Shippey also revealed that there will be 20 episodes in the series' first season.
Okay.
So did you hear about that short-lived television show by Sauron, Pimping My Crib?
Oh dear. Also, just one more thing. It just says here that the writer's room, at the beginning of the year, it says the writer's room is working under lock and key. They're already generating really exciting material. They're down in Santa Monica, California. You have to go through such clearance, and they have all their windows taped closed. And there's a security guard that sits outside, and you have to have a fingerprint to get in there because their whole board is up on a thing of the whole season. So they have like the whole, obviously spoilers there. So, and then lots of speculation. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot else except that it will be filmed in New Zealand, and they wanted to bring back the same life of Middle Earth that we kind of are familiar with from the Lord of the Rings movies. Somewhere majestic with pristine coasts, forests, and mountains, that is also a home to world-class sets, studios, and highly skilled and experienced craft people and their stuff. Do you think that Weta will be involved with the costumes and all that?
I was watching a documentary on YouTube. Surprise, surprise. One of the comments they made was, if you have a large budget, you do a sci-fi film. If you have a medium budget, you do a reality show. If you have a small budget, you do a medieval show.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, the time period, unless they do a lot of magical effects, is not very demanding for special effects.
Right. One thing you guys might want to consider is on the 4th of July, there will be an online Tolkien Society seminar that might be worthwhile to. I'll put that in the notes so you guys can read about that. But they usually have papers, and in this case, it's obviously, since they're not meeting in person, there's an openness for people to send in things. Although I think it looks like the application is closed on the 5th of April, so your papers are not welcome anymore. But they are hoping to have people, share, and I'm assuming read online. That might be interesting. I enjoyed it. I went there. It's been 5 years ago that I went, and I don't know why they have it on the 4th of July. It's always on the 4th of July, but maybe they're thumbing the nose at us Americans. I doubt it. It's a great seminar. There's a lot of people who show up, and that's where I met John Garth. He made a presentation there, and it was only about 25 people there. It was really nice and cozy. So it'll probably be a lot more people attending this time. Well, if you didn't have anything else to share, I need to type up these notes and try to send them out here in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for that. Anybody else have anything else before we finish?
No, my mind is blank.
Okay. Hawk or Christopher?
No, not so much.
Okay, I'm just going to say something on the chat just to see if. Oh, my chat's not enabled. There it is.
I have a mouser here who keeps bringing me gifts.
Offerings, sacrifices.
Sacrifices.
We have had an explosion of field mice this spring.
Well, you're not supposed to blow them up. You shouldn't have explosions.
You mean you don't stick propane down burrowing animal holes and light them?
No.
That sounds like a whole bunch of OSHA violations.
I heard about a guy who did that one, ended up blowing up in his face. So I'm just checking in with Hawk if he had any comments to make before the end. But yeah. So what I will do is I'll just make it clear that the next letter that we will be reading when we come back will be letter 172 next time. And what is the third Saturday in May?
Cat entanglement.
The third Saturday in May is the 16th.
The 16th. I can't see your faces, by the way, guys.
I'm still on.
And the 16th is Laura's 43rd birthday.
Okay. The 16th is when is her birthday?
The 16th.
Ah, okay. So you will be.
And the 20th is our 14th anniversary.
Okay. I will be gone the week before, but I should be back by the 16th. So I'm still on for that. So I'll still run it. I'm thinking I might use Zoom. Jitsy's okay, but it seems like it's a little bit buggy, or and it's probably maybe it's operator error. But like right now, everything was fine before, and now your audio or your video is gone, and I have no idea why. It may also be just because I'm using my phone, rather than the PC equivalent for Jitsi, which is typically how Hawk uses it is with his laptop. So it probably works a lot better on there.
Yeah, we're still getting your image, but mine is kind of grainy, and I'm not. Wasn't mine clear in the Zoom calls we did?
I thought so.
Well, this is the same computer, so
yeah. I think I'm just going to prefer to go to there, and I can record it on Zoom as well, and then send that link to Hawk. So that's my preference. But anyway, obviously, Jitsi's got a lot of good features to it too. I'm just not as experienced in it. Yeah, I should be back by May 16 from Alice's wedding. All right, so Chris, Richard, Hawk, and anyone else who, if you're able to listen online or listen to us later on, may you be well. Namarie.
Namarie.